Good morning. We are live once again with my friend and esteemed colleague, Dr. T.C. Fuller. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Once again, I am better than I deserve. I'm getting the notifications, TC, that we are live, so that's a good thing. While we are waiting for folks to jump on, sir, if I may, let's pay the bills around here. We have some amazing sponsors here at the American Warrior Show, and I guess we should probably introduce ourselves. My name is Rich Brown, co-host, co-founder of the American Warrior Society, the American Warrior Show, America's leading self-defense podcast. I'm a former police officer, corrections officer, special operations officer, and 23 years in the Marine Corps, retired, thank God. And Dr. Fuller, would you introduce yourself, please, sir?
Well, my name is T.C. Fuller. I'm from California, where I learned to shoot. How cool is that?
So you're the one. Wait a minute.
I'm that guy. I'm the last guy. I did my undergraduate degree out at Fresno State. Go Bulldogs. And then went in the Army. Did that for about 12 years. Left the Army. Did infantry officer in the 1st Gulf War. Then I finished up as an EOD guy. Got a couple of commands. I was very lucky there. And then joined the FBI. Did 20 years in the FBI. Got out and retired here to the Carolinas, down in the Low Country. And now I run my own security consulting firearms training organization. That's the nutshell version. But I know you have bills to pay, so I wanted to be quick about it.
Yeah, we got a lot of folks jumping on already. Dr. Fuller, we got William Parker, my good friend and retired naval officer out in Montana, coin number 800. Akeem Purefoy, good to see you, Akeem. I spoke to Akeem on the phone the other day. Hope you're doing well, sir. Alan is on from Free, Virginia. Good to see you, sir. Tony, Semper Fi, brother, another former Marine down there in Brunswick, Georgia. Gerald out there in Oregon. Akeem says, Rich, expect to get my challenge coin in the mail today. Well, outstanding. And if you're wondering what Akeem is talking about, here is where's it at there? American Warrior Society challenge coin. And I made it real easy for you. It's on the top of the links today. If you want to find out becoming a member of our self-defense community is the right decision for you. Dr. Fuller, of course, is a member, charter member, I believe.
1620, baby.
Gal is on from the Philippines, says, good morning, Dr. Fuller. Good morning, everyone. Mr. Bob Bill is on. Bob, one of these days, my man, I got to get you on. And PJ, I got to get you back on too. PJ is a retired FBI agent as well.
Good looking fellow, I imagine.
Something about those agents, man. I tell you what, you guys have amazing hair. I will say that. Of course, PJ does not.
At Quantico, when you go through the academy, there's a whole class on that.
I'm telling you.
Taught by a former SEAL, I think.
Yeah. Every time I've been fortunate enough to train with FBI agents, I tell you what, the hair products are amazing. Tony says, rest in peace to Dick Marcinko. Yeah, I saw that he passed away. Did you see that, TC?
I did. Although I haven't been able to find out what precipitated his demise. I'm sad to see he's gone.
Yeah, he was 81, so getting long in the tooth.
Good for him. We should all be so lucky, huh?
Yeah, and of course the nation's enemies have been trying to kill that guy for most of his adult life. So let's get some sponsors out of the way. We got to pay for today's show, Dr. Fuller.
Well, get on it.
Get on it. That's what I'm talking about. We got amazing sponsors. Like I'm looking over here at Bob. He's staring at me. Bob is the body opponent bag from Century Martial Arts. This is the Bob XL, which is going to give you the ability to do those leg strikes. You can put a key top on Bob, shoot Bob, take him to the range. You can do anything you want. Bob is an amazing training tool. We also have sponsors like APPHemp.com, which is Appalachian Standards, makers of some of the finest CBD products I've ever used. And they're just happen to be made by my good friend Jesse. Jesse and I were in the Marine Corps together. He's a retired gunnery sergeant. Him and his family are growing some amazing products over there in the beautiful mountains of Asheville, North Carolina. We also have the Cool Fire Trainer. Why dry fire? When you can cool fire. It takes the dry fire game to the next level, and it makes you focus on your grip, because if you're dry firing alone in the dark, guess what? You may let your grip slide. So change out the barrel, change out the recoil spring, and you get felt recoil. Got 23 folks joining us. Please like and share. I'm paying for the show right now with sponsors, but here in a second, Dr. Fuller and I are going to get into the meat of today's show. You're definitely going to want to check this out. We also have Mountain Man Medical, makers of the co-branded trauma kit. Let's say you don't need the full IFAC kit, and all you need is to replace your gloves or that Israeli bandage or God knows what that is deteriorating in your kit. You can go there and pick up a la carte items, or you can buy the entire kit as well. We also have Precision Holsters, makers of the Ultra Appendix line that Rich Brown carries. Mike Seeklander carries his own signature line. So check them out in the links today. They are veteran owned and operated, made here in America. They have a 100% no questions asked money back guarantee. Please check out Precision Holsters. I can't say enough good things about them. And every single time I train somewhere, somebody's always saying, man, what is that holster? Let me check that out. So PJ Tahoe says, I left all the hair to the good Dr. Fuller. I'm bald as Seeklander. Yes, you are. At 25 folks on, and like just introduced ourselves, but I wanted to say, a lot of people don't know this about Dr. Fuller. He was actually Mr. June in the FBI's Playboy calendar.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that. I noticed that Skip Seitz is on here. There's a guy you should have on. He was one of my instructors at Quantico. If you could get half the stories out of him that he's lived through, it would make for 2 hours of really entertaining show.
Skip, you have an open invitation, sir. Also, if we can get you to tell us about how you won the coveted Beijing's Crying Monkey Award for making that arrest back in Vermont, we'd love to hear about that.
It was mostly because I slipped on a log and landed on my crotch. That's really what won me the Crying Monkey.
Well, that is a coveted award. Not many people have had access to. I'm going to read your bio, TC, and we'll get into the show. T.C. Fuller is an experienced federal investigator and firearms trainer. He has spent his life carrying a firearm for the United States government. T.C. served as an Army Infantry officer, explosive ordnance disposal officer, before leaving the Army to accept an appointment as a special agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He spent the next 20 years working in all areas of investigative interests within the FBI and served for several years as an instructor at the FBI's Firearms Training Unit in Quantico, Virginia. TC holds a Bachelor of Science in Criminology, as well as a Master of Education in Interdisciplinary Studies and a Doctorate in Educational Leadership and Policy Studies. As a published writer, TC has written an innovative book on the topic of improving law enforcement deadly force training, as well as having written for several print magazines on the areas of law enforcement procedures, explosives, firearms, and edged weapons. Among TC's personal achievements, he has been awarded the U.S. Army's highest peacetime award for heroism, the Soldier's Medal. Besides finding, capturing, and convicting a fugitive on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, TC has also been a successful competitive shooter for more than 20 years, earning a masterclass certification from the International Defensive Pistol Association, winning numerous local, state, and regional competitions along the way. He is now operating his own company, the Horus Group LLC, which serves as a consultancy on firearms and training, as well as providing high-end private firearms training for both armed professionals and citizens. Good morning.
Morning, sir.
And again, this is a lot of people don't know this. When you graduated Chula Vista High School, you were voted most likely to stand in Osama bin Laden's bombed out ruins someday, which is weird how they know.
Really good picture of.
Yes, you do. It is a nice picture of you standing in Osama's former house.
I have another picture of me where I carved on the wall, Len Hatton says hi. And Lenny Hatton was was the FBI agent that was killed on 9/11. So I carved it into bin Laden's living room wall.
I love it. I love that. So Dr. Fuller, I guess we could start off, you and I were kind of texting back and forth about propaganda and its efficacy. Can you tell us a little bit more on its impact and why are we talking about propaganda today as two self-defense guys?
Well, yeah, I think it's a good topic, I think, for us to discuss here, especially given your viewership, Rich. I'd like to apologize, by the way, for the glare on my glasses. There's little or nothing I can do about it, so please forgive. But yeah, propaganda, I've been thinking about it a lot lately, and you and I, like, as you said, we've been discussing it because I think we're seeing it more and more, and it's being less and less subtle. Let's start with perhaps defining the term. When we say propaganda, we're really talking about biased communication. When you get right down to it, marketing. But it tends to have sort of a vaguely malignant feel to the word, as if we're trying to influence people in a negative way. And that can or cannot be true. But typically when we say propaganda, that's what we're talking about, is trying to influence masses of people to behave and think in a particularly desirous way. And I say desirous, not necessarily desirous for the greater good, but by whoever is sort of emitting this propaganda. And I think we're seeing it a lot lately, and it's really impactful. I mean, the idea that it doesn't work is ridiculous. It does work. The Athenians are kind of the first ones to use propaganda, and they used it, thousands of years ago, and it's been used successfully ever since.
Yeah, what was the Office of War Information that was ran very successfully during World War II, and then it was shut down and shuttered, so to speak, because they said in an age of nuclear weapons, they didn't want to get the public so riled up that they would be quick to go to the nuclear option. But they were very effective, during World War II with propaganda.
It was, and it started in World War One. We really start to see the posters, beware the Hun and the sun, and the pictures of the German soldiers bayoneting women and infants. We really started to see it in the United States coming out of there, and they started to put studies into it. And then we have, of course, 1984 comes out. Orwell talks about the efficacy. He doesn't specifically address the efficacy of propaganda. He just shows you what it does, and it's how it's used by government actors.
Especially if it conforms to your own bias. I mean, if you already have a bias, man, that makes for a very fertile ground for propaganda, right?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, because ultimately you're trying to produce an emotional response, right? You're not trying to produce a rational, well thought out response. You're appealing to emotion. And, the best propaganda starts with a kernel of truth. Then it blows it completely out of proportion, if necessary. I mean, the major weapons of propaganda, I mean, one of the biggest one is the suggestion, the hint, the insinuation that things are bad, and then it'll eventually kind of gets to a point where you can come outright and say these things. But you look at let's say the most obvious example of successful use of propaganda in the 20th century, Joseph Goebbels, Hitler. You had all of those big rallies that they had, and that they make movies about him, ostensibly documentaries. It's really just propaganda films. But it starts out with we're going to blame the Jews. Well, we start out with Jews are successful. Well, there's some truth to that. There's some, for such a small percentage of the population, they had a disproportionately large success rate, if you will. And it wasn't a massive success rate. It was just disproportionately large. Well, you start with that kernel of truth, and then you begin to spin it. And you suggest that there's something evil and malignant about what they're doing. Yeah. And the next thing you know, you've got trains headed east. That's
right. Well, look at them. It's a closed community. They don't want you in. What are they doing over there in the synagogues? I mean, and again, if you're someone that was devastated by, the collapse of the German economy and, everything, it's easy. You're looking for someone to blame. And here's this small community within your community that seems to have its hand in anything to make it money. And
that guy is making money and I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm smart. I should be just as successful as he is. He must have an unfair advantage. And propaganda builds on tribalism, right? It creates an us versus them mindset. It is a way of establishing a tribe. And I would suggest that, okay, if your propaganda is more nationalist, like say here in the United States, if our propaganda was we're number one, which we saw a lot of right after 9/11, for those of us that have enough gray in our beard to recall, it was very much a one country, one fight sort of attitude. I would suggest that's not necessarily a bad thing.
No.
When you start using the fissures in a society to create tribes within that societal group, now you've got a problem because you're balkanizing your own organization, your own society. Companies don't put up with that. Think about it in the military. If you had, everybody's green, right? Marine Corps, Army, same way. Everybody's green. Well, as soon as people start saying, yeah, but just the black guys are over here and the Puerto Rican guys are over there and the white guys are over there, that's a problem. That becomes a real problem to unit cohesion. And every leader at every level is, sort of directed to break that down. And the military's generally pretty good about breaking down those color barriers, those racial barriers, those religious barriers, and creating a one team, one fight mindset. And a big part
Yeah.
of how they do that is propaganda.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And it, again, it's almost like violence, right? Violence is not always immoral. There's an appropriate time for violence. Is there an appropriate time for propaganda?
Oh, there always is. Of course there is. And again, it depends on the goal you're looking for. I would suggest that the propaganda that we're seeing in our society today is not necessarily the kind of propaganda we would want to encourage across the board. But there's certainly a time. I mean, let's face it, if you're going to take some 17-year-old Marine, put him on an island in the South Pacific, and a 20-year-old Marine is going to tell him, charge that machine gun nest and kill everybody inside it while it's shooting at you and while they're trying to kill you, that's a tough sell.
Yeah.
Okay. But if from the day he joins the Corps until the day he gets off that landing craft on that beach, you're hitting him with propaganda about how much of a badass he is, how much better than any other soldier on the planet he is, how easy this is going to be for him to do.
And how easy the other side is.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, think about your time in the military. When you ran from point A to point B, you're singing songs designed to unify you as a unit. But also, I mean, think about the lyrics to the songs you sang. Some of them were pretty violent.
Yeah.
But you're inculcating your people to think the way you want them to think, to act the way you want them to act. So that when that day comes and you do have to tell them, take that knife, run over there and jump into that bunker and kill those 5 guys. You don't get, a deer in the headlights look or a pig looking at a wristwatch, right? You don't get this. What? That's ridiculous. I'm not going to do that. You get Roger that, Sergeant, and off he goes.
Yeah. And it's just so, many people that are maybe watching or listening later, when you said that, it reminded me of a cadence, young commie bastard running right at me. I stuck my K-bar in the socket where his eyeball used to be. So,
right. And they're all like that. I mean, Sniper
They're all
Wonderland, you remember those? Napalm sticks to kids. I mean, it's outside that context, it's brutal. You just look at that now with a little bit of hindsight, a little bit of age on you, and you go, whoa, settle down there, killer.
Yeah.
But again, what's the goal? What are you trying to establish? What are you trying to do? And that propaganda works. And I laugh because a lot of times I talk to people and they're saying, oh yeah, it works on that and that and that group. It doesn't work on me because I know what's happening.
Yeah.
No, it works on you. It works on me. It works on us all. The best you can hope for is that you're aware of it and that you can kind of pay attention.
Yeah. Those, I read a memoir of a guy who served in Vietnam in the Marine Corps. And he said, every single meal, they would come up and they would request permission to basically get a spoon once they got their tray of food, and they'd have to walk up to the drill instructor and identify themselves, one Cong killer for Viet Cong, one Cong killer, and they got a spoon. And if you do that for 13 weeks, all 3 meals, you're going to get a Cong killer, a Viet Cong killer at the end of it, right?
Well, and that's just one aspect.
Oh, yeah.
Right? That's one 30-second aspect a day or a meal. Ranger school was the same thing. We did all that stuff. You recited all kinds of things, sang all kinds of cadences, jump school, basic training, IOBC. I mean, every school I went to in the military is like that. And
for a reason.
Sir?
For a reason, right?
Right, for a reason.
They want to drive and channel your actions to a specific objective.
Right. And, in propaganda, it looks to be accepted without challenge. It really wants to simulate those actions without significant consideration, right? It doesn't want you to stop and ponder, what are the deeper meanings of what I'm doing here? Yeah. It's really looking for an emotional, immediate response. Input, response, input, response, input, response. And it starts with that suggestion, the insinuation, and then, the military is a little bit more heavy-handed than that, but it can be. It's a lot more insular society. It's a closed loop echo chamber, so it can, and there's also time limits, right? I mean, you may graduate tomorrow and be in the Gulf next week, right? We don't have a whole lot of time to monkey around, so we got to get this done. What we're seeing in our society now is these same marketing ideas, these same propaganda ideas, but being used by groups that may or may not have our best interests at heart.
Well, could you elaborate on that a little bit more? Do you care to give an anecdote or two?
Well, I mean, pay attention. How about, right off the top of my head, I'd say the riots that we all watched over the last couple of years in the summer. What we didn't have was a blanket media approach of knock it off, right? We didn't see mass media saying this has got to stop. You have legitimate grievances. We'll sit down and discuss them. like rational, calm adults. You didn't see that. You didn't see politicians coming out and saying, hey, whoa, 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 everybody, let's just take a breath. Okay? They were not emphatic about it. I mean, however you feel about the January 6th activities in D.C., what you did not see was the president saying, stop. Just, right. It wasn't emphatic. What he said is what he said. And we can debate and argue around that all you want. But what was not said was, knock it off, go home, write your congressman, vote, but just stop this. This has got to stop right now. You didn't see a unified approach by any leadership. Law enforcement was saying it, but they were getting drowned out. You didn't see congressional members coming out and saying stop. And we continuously see that, right? I mean, during the Rittenhouse trial, during the Chauvin trial, we saw members of Congress and the president inserting themselves into the justice system inappropriately, would be my argument. I mean, we saw a congresswoman from Los Angeles fly up to Minnesota and start talking about, hey, if we don't get the jury response we want, we're burning this place down.
Yeah.
That is the end result of a lengthy period of propaganda.
Agreed.
And then she's continuing to exert pressure using her bully pulpit to espouse still more propaganda. Not just that we're going to do this right now, but the subtext to that is it's acceptable behavior. What I'm doing is acceptable. What I'm extolling you to do is acceptable.
Yeah.
I would argue that's just not true. It's not acceptable. It shouldn't be acceptable in any coherent society with any long-term goals.
We are seeing it a lot, and we've been seeing it for, one could argue, forever, but we're just focused on our lifetime and the last decade or so. I remember Obama doing the whole thing with, if I don't have a son, but if I did, he would look like Trayvon. Right. And, what is the subtext you're trying to get at there?
Right. And another thing that we haven't talked about yet, but the propaganda makes a big use of symbols. Symbolism is a very, very big piece of that pie. To use the Marine Corps example again, the eagle, globe, and anchor. I always joke that you can always tell a Marine, you can't tell him much, and you can identify his car because it's got an EGA sticker on it somewhere. At least one. But that symbol, that EGA symbol, they make a big deal out of it, earning your EGA all the way through basic training. And when you finally get it the day you graduate, big deal, right, Rich? I bet you still remember getting yours.
Yeah,
right?
Big deal.
I remember my last jump at jump school. They came out and they pounded that set of jump wings into my chest. That was a big deal for me. Of course, the swastika for the Nazis, big symbol, right? And they also had other symbols, right? Their salute. It was all iconic. We're seeing a lot of these symbols. Obama had his poster. Remember his Hope poster? You do a good job there. For a bearded white guy in Tennessee. Yeah. It's pretty good. But we see that level of propaganda over and over again. Of course, the biggest one I think that we could discuss probably for hours is the most recent presidential campaign. I think I can make a strong argument that our current sitting president didn't run much of a campaign. He wasn't out stumping in the traditional sense, as has been done for the last 2 centuries in this country. He largely stayed away from the cameras and let the propaganda machine get him elected. And the whole campaign was Trump bad.
Orange man bad. Yeah.
Orange man bad. Right. You may think that may be what you honestly believe, but that doesn't run a country.
No.
Right. And so I think now you're seeing a lot of buyer's remorse with his numbers being where they are, predictably so. I mean, he started off with half the country disliking him, and then it just went down from there when the people that ushered him in, found out that, hey, my gas prices went up. My cost of living has gone up. Things are more expensive. And this is hitting me personally in the pocketbook. Orange man gone, but, this guy's back again because the propaganda machine, and it's still churning. It's just got less fuel in it.
Bob leads to our next point, I think, Dr. Fuller, and that is, he says, I think the media today across the board has given up any semblance of objectivity, where in the past there may have been some possibility of them holding leaders accountable.
Yeah, I think we've seen a real shift in this country. I have to agree with him on that. Again, for those of us that are a little bit older, we recall, Cronkite, Brinkley, Morrow in some cases, rather. I mean, guys who got up there and reported the news, and they tried to be objective. Now, yes, they had their personal proclivities and their opinions, but they largely tried to keep that out of the reporting of the news. And I'm sure you recall the last minute or 2 minutes of an evening news broadcast would be the editorial of the station management, and then they would read their editorials. But the rest of the time, it was the news. And they tried very hard to be objective. They weren't always successful, but they did try very hard to do that.
It seemed like the editorials back then were more thought provoking. Yeah, I'm gonna pose something for you to ponder. Now it's like, I'm gonna do your thinking for you. This is wrong. This is evil. Sure. That kind of sort of thing. And
with that, here's some food for thought approach. Then you're in a more of a subtle propaganda position where you provide the suggestions and the implications and the insinuations. Now, like you said, we're going to do your thinking for you. And I've read a couple of books that talk about one of the reasons they think Hitler rose to power the way he did and got a whole country heading the way he wanted to was they were so traumatized that they wanted somebody to come and do their thinking for them. They wanted a father figure, an all-knowing messianic leader to just do their thinking for them.
Yeah. To solidify what you just said, if you listening this morning, you haven't read Eric Hoffer's book, The True Believer, Thoughts and Theories on the Nature of Mass Movement, phenomenal book. Can't recommend it enough. And in that book, he says that they were interviewing someone who I believe was an SS member after World War II and said, how could y'all follow Hitler so blindly? It's like, well, he freed us. And freed you from what? From freedom. And I think that makes your point. He did the thinking for you. You do the things I'm telling you, and it's going to get us to the end goal that we all want.
Yeah. And we get a lot of people now that get sucked into movements and pick your movement. Yeah. Democratic Party, Republican Party, NRA, whatever it is that, I agree with a couple of your platforms. So I now self-identify as a member of your tribe. Therefore, I adopt your entire platform by virtue of the fact that I'm a member of your tribe. Yeah. And I seem to find people that just abdicate their responsibility to critically think because, well, I'm a Democrat, therefore I must think this way. I'm a Republican, therefore I must think this way. I can't, stray outside those lines. And those are self-imposed limits.
Yeah.
But we seem to adopt them because it's, it's like a warm blanket. It's like, okay, I'm comfortable in here. I'm safe in here. I know that when I mouth these platitudes, I will be accepted by the other members of my tribe.
I won't be challenged. I'll be welcomed.
Right. I'll be, witness. The one that comes readily to mind is every time there's some sort of a gun control law that goes up or a gun control conversation that goes up or a limit to 2A freedoms, there will be people that lose their minds. I remember when you and Mike were discussing the need and the wisdom of getting training if you're going to own a firearm.
We were attacked.
And oh my God. And you guys are two of the strongest 2A supporters I know. But the idea that you weren't saying the government should mandate it before you own a gun. What you're saying is you own a gun, so you have a responsibility to get some training with this. You don't hurt yourself or those around you, which is a perfectly rational conversational topic. But people went after you, something fierce. For a long period of time.
Yeah. And we had to, try to answer it just to kind of explain the position, but people that already went tone deaf, like, no, you said training. Like, oh my God, man.
Right. And so that's what I'm saying. When people join groups, they lose or they abdicate. They don't necessarily lose it, but they abdicate their responsibility, in my mind, to critically think, to think things through. And we're producing generations of people that don't want to think. Well, that's great if you're in charge and you just want mindless hordes. But I would suggest it is not an traditional American trait.
Well, doesn't that speak to the second point we were going to talk about today, and that is the importance of a free and neutral press on the democratic process?
Brilliant segue, Rich.
Sally segue, man.
Nicely done. And we've had this conversation as well, where we always hear, free press is critical to the success of any democracy. And what's the Washington Post banner? Democracy dies in darkness. Got to bring the light of truth. Well, okay, I'll buy that but you need to be neutral, right? You need to report the news, not report the opinion, because you report the opinion, then people adopt that as fact. And that simply isn't the case. I agree that a free and neutral press is critical. I mean, look at William Randolph Hearst 100 plus years ago and his yellow journalism. The influence, we can look back on that and look at the influence he had. That was one man who's a huge media mogul.
Rupert Murdoch may be that guy
Murdoch,
today,
yeah.
or Ted Turner. I mean, you could make a case for that.
So as soon as you take news out of the news business and put it into the entertainment business, which I think we can put that largely at the feet of Ted Turner, you change the priority. The priority is no longer reporting the most accurate and dependable news. The priority is now airtime, commercials, clickbait, advertising, right? Because I need to keep you glued to the seat. I need to keep you watching and clicking on my links and paying my advertisers, so my advertisers pay me.
I think it's interesting. People say, I just want you to report the facts, but you and I have been, you were FBI for 20-ish years. I was an investigator for years and years in the Marine Corps. And if you look at, like, if I reported the news to you like I would an investigation, it's very dry. It's filled with nothing more than the facts, from which I make reasonable interpretations, and from that maybe write up an arrest warrant. But I think that, to their point, they're trying to give you infotainment, right?
Sure.
Because they have to sell airtime, and they do have an agenda. And there's a fertile ground right now of the masses looking to self-identify. I mean, who would have thought, if you would have told me 20, 30 years ago, we're going to have a media platform that can be spun to the liberal bias. We're going to have one that's right wing, and we're going to have some that are extremely right wing. I mean, I would have been like, what are you talking about? That's not possible. And yet here we are.
Yeah, you're right. And I touched on a point there too, that the nature of our society has changed too. That the people that you're reporting this news to have changed as well. It's more, shorter attention spans. They want more bling, if you will. I mean, I remember watching the news as a kid in the 70s and 80s. It was very dull, right? Maybe there might be a spinning planet that kind of fades in from the left and streaks across the thing, and then it just went right to Cronkite's face. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Right, and then you just got to report. Maybe up here in the corner there was a little I can't get my hand here. It might be a little picture of something, and they may cut to somebody else. But by and large, it was a guy talking to the screen. Well, then you get CNN comes along, and you've got, this is CNN, with James Earl Jones' voice booming through there. You're like, oh, that's cool, and you've got all kinds of graphics and
the Fox News alert,
right. Boom, and it blows up in your face.
And it's designed to elicit an emotional response from you. I mean, this is well calculated.
And I don't want to miss that next, there might be another news alert coming out in 20 seconds. I got to watch. I got to get home and watch. And that 24-hour news cycle, right? It's tailor-made for inserting propaganda. And then you couple all of that with the information gathering that's going on, that metadata mining that's going on, and they can really, really tailor what they're delivering to their target demographic. And they really know what trips your trigger, because every time you turn on that computer and you click on something, it's being recorded and it's being data mined by companies that are making tons of money to data mine it and sell it.
Yeah.
So you couple those two together, and you have a really, really devastating methodology by which to, influence masses amount of people.
Yeah. Speaking of that, I don't know if Zuckerberg still allows it, but you used to be able to go deep into your own page, and there was a part where it was a little paragraph of what Facebook had decided about you based on the things you click and the things you like. And it was like, and I read mine, and it was like right-wing, ultra-conservative, married, heterosexual, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, wow, okay. And some of that was true. And some of it was like, no, not necessarily. I left lean on a few different topics, and then I'm to the right of Pat Buchanan on others, So it's not fair to put me in a certain bracket, but then I will go on Facebook Marketplace, TC, and I'll search for, maybe I'll fix up an Italian sports car, or I'm looking for a good price on a Rolex or something like that. And instead of giving me that algorithm, what I get fed a steady diet of Trump stuff. And I'm like, if the algorithm really was based on my search results, I would never see this stuff. But it's not. It's based on an assumption, but based on the things I view and the things I click on. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah, it does. And that, again, they're going for the emotion. They're going to trip those emotional triggers on you. And they're constantly refining it. And you couple that with a propaganda machine, and it's impactful. It's very impactful. And I think that our presidential candidates are realizing it, and it's drifting down through our gubernatorial candidates. More and more politicians are using it. It's becoming cheaper and cheaper. So you're going to start seeing it all the way down to the local levels.
But is anybody pausing to go, where does this road take us? I mean, I think because every politician is so caught up in this election cycle, we're not thinking 5, 10, 20 years down the road. And the same goes for the mainstream media. They've got ad buys to sell, they got airtime to sell. I understand that they're a company, they got to make money, and yet nobody is kind of pumping the brakes and go, is this the society we want to live in? Because if this continues to go on, the bifurcation is only going to grow to the part where we do balkanize ourselves. Or am I making too much of that?
I don't think you were making too much of it. And again, we've had this conversation before where, here in the United States, people tend to think in 4-year cycles, right? Election cycles. Some of our national enemies think in terms of centuries.
Yes.
With our current mindset, you don't win that fight. You don't win thinking 4 years down the road. You think, and I say to my wife a lot, I say, we're going to solve today's problems today. We'll solve tomorrow's problems tomorrow. Mm-hmm. That's fine in a 4-person family.
Yeah.
It's a little bit, I think, less wise for a nation state to act in that manner. And I don't think anybody is sort of looking down the line because, look, I got to get reelected tomorrow. I got to worry about the next election. I'm a congressman. I got to get elected every 2 years. Now, yes, I'm in a Democrat +9 district, so I'm not about to lose my seat, but I got to bring in money. I got to feed the machine or my bills will get killed in committee. The speaker won't let my bill get out of committee. I won't get the support to make real substantive change that I want to do because I haven't earned the money. I haven't done what I need to do based on what my tribe is telling me I have to do.
I'm glad you said the money, the M word, money, and because really it's not so much about stumping and getting the electorate to do something. It's I think the concern is money, and with money I can influence the electorate. But before I let you talk about that, Dr. Fuller, I want to get to some of the comments that we have coming in here. Thank you to the 37 folks we got joining us. PJ says, with such a myriad of continuous media input out there now, it seems that society is in general has lost the ability or perhaps the interest in making decisions based on research. We now see snap decisions based on a singular data point, which is often dripping with propaganda.
It's true.
It is true. Yeah, Alan says, the teaser commentary that goes on for 30 minutes before you actually get to the story. Scott says, late to the party. Good morning, Rich. Good morning, TC. And this is a good one. This is where I want to hover for a minute. Kurt says, my son attends a boarding school in New England, a very good school. However, the ultra-liberal political propaganda machine on campus is unbelievable. Then he goes on to ask, how do I combat that with common sense other than taking him out of the school?
It's a valid question, and it's a shockingly erudite one from Kurt because I know him, and I'm really kind of happy to see that he's turned a page.
Very lucid comment.
It's lucid. It's well thought out. Congratulations, Kurt. But it's a good question. I mean, I put my daughter in a very, very good private high school up in upstate New York, and the same thing happened. She came out. She's very intelligent. She does a good job. She does real well. But she is on the left side of the spectrum. I'm okay with that. I mean, let's face it. I'm old enough to not define my friendships and my familial relationships based on political opinions. Remember those days when you went and voted, and then we all got on with our lives again.
Yeah.
And define our entire social structure around who people voted for.
Yeah.
But I think the answer to Kurt's question is just be you. Keep those doors of communication open. You got to keep talking to your kids, no matter how bizarre they get. You got to keep talking to them, and you'll have a shocking amount of influence over them. I hear things come out of my daughter's mouth sometimes when she's not necessarily talking to me, and I'm like, hey, that's from me. Well, what do you know? But at the end of the day, you gave them life. You gave it to them. It's their life. The decisions they make, go with God. Because if we all were on the hook for the stupid crap we said back when we were 18 and 20 years old, we'd be in a lot of trouble. Kids got to be kids. So do what you can, Kurt. Best of luck to you. It's a fight we all fight.
Yeah, Johnny says most people will never change their minds with a revolutionary mindset. Rather, it takes a revolution moment to change their minds.
Insightful.
And speaking of that, here's another segue for you. The movement now by one party to cure a problem they created and how that's marketed, i.e. whether that's defund the police, crime spikes, they feign ignorance and shock, call for tighter controls and federal intervention. What do you think about what's going on in that realm, TC?
Well, I think you really kind of summed up the last 2 years there real well. And it's happening right now, right? We've had a mass movement mostly by one party to defund the police as a cure for societal ills. Somehow the police are responsible for the fact that you raised a kid named Skittles who went out and, mugs people and kills people, but it's the police's fault. Okay, so let's defund the police because that will solve our problems. And then predictably, what happens? Fewer cops on the street, more crime. I mean, there's a reason that each of these communities had the police forces they had. They paid the money to get the police forces they had because of the crime problem that they had. And it went away because they had more police. So you take the police off the street and crime spikes. And we're seeing it all over the country. Oddly enough, not in my town. We haven't defunded the cops. We have a great police force here. Everybody likes them. They do a real good job. And we don't have a crime spike. We still see criminals come down from Charlotte, which is run by a different political party. And they have a real crime problem there that come down here. And then we chase them out and they go away. But you see a crime spike in a lot of these communities that have defunded their police. And then we see the very same people that a year ago were screaming, hey, we've got to defund the police. And we're going to because we're on the city council. Now they're clutching their pearls and going, oh, my God, how did this happen? The crime is just getting out of control. We need to tighten this up. I used to live up near Burlington, Vermont. I worked up there for a decade. And they had a police force of about 105 funded slots. They never usually hit 105, but they were close to it. They decided we're going to jump on this bandwagon and cut funding. Now, mind you, they don't have a massive crime problem there, but they went ahead and cut the funding. They don't have a racial problem. The police there are very diverse. They're very community oriented, very professional group. So they cut them down to 64 or 78 positions, funded positions, right? So 30%, 25%, whatever it is, they chopped the funding. Well, they also spend a lot of their time vilifying the police, as you were seeing in communities all across the country. So what happens? Well, normal attrition happens. Cops leave the department. But then a bunch of them were like, hey, screw you guys, I'm out of here. They said, they see the writing on the wall and they bolt.
That was a good Eric Cartman, by the way.
I spent a lot of time in my room alone. But they start getting off the PD, and other PDs are snatching them up. It's like, hey, these guys are well trained. They're from the biggest PD in the state. Let's get them. Well, then the PD wakes up one day and there's 64 cops.
Yeah.
So now we're 40% down, and they haven't had a chief in 2 years because nobody will apply for it because nobody in that position wants to go work with the city council and fight with the city council all the time. So they've got an acting chief for a couple of years. They're down to 64 people. And the city council is now going, let's offer $10,000 bonuses to everybody who's still here to stay. And they bumped the funding back up, not to the full where it was before, but they've had to pump up the numbers because crime is just out of control, for this small rural community. But it is an exemplar for what we're seeing all over the country in all these places. And of course, now they can run on a law and order platform on their next election cycle, right? They can say, crime is out of control. You've got to reelect me so I can stop this and I can get on this and solve this problem. Forget the fact
that I created,
right? That's the part that they're not saying. And some places are calling for federal intervention. We need to get the feds out here. Well, I would suggest to you that plussing up the federal law enforcement organizations so that they can involve themselves in local policing is one, not an American approach. It hasn't been for the entire time this country has been in existence, and it's just not a good idea. It simply isn't. You want local control of your police departments
for a variety of reasons, right?
For a whole variety of reasons.
I mean, I'll give you just one off the top of my head, and then I want to. TC, you've done a great job of laying the foundation of the 15,000 foot view, not even the 30,000, just the 50. I want to take us down into the weeds, since you and I were grunts in law enforcement, you from the Fed side and me from a more local. There's a different way you police in rural Montana, in say Fort Bend, for example, than you would in New York City. But if you federalize this in any way, then you're not going to get that cultural appreciation and understanding for the communities that they serve. I think that's one point you're insinuating at. Am I right in that?
Sure. I mean, when I went in the FBI, I asked to go back home. I asked to go, you have to put all 56 of your wishes. We have 56 field offices, and you got to number them 1 through 56 where you want to go. And mine were all West Coast, right? San Francisco, Los Angeles, Sacramento, San Diego, Portland, Seattle. I wanted to go back home because I'd been away from home for 15 years at that point. They sent me to northern Vermont. Well, yeah, can I learn? Can I adapt? Can I insert myself in the community? Sure. But if you're from northern Vermont, you're from northern Vermont.
Yeah.
If I'm not from the Cumberland Plateau and I move to the Cumberland Plateau, people might accept me to a point, but I'm going to be a carpetbagger forever.
Yes. Yeah.
My in-laws refer to me as a Yankee, and I'm like, I'm from San Diego. I mean, how much further south can I go?
I tell you, I had the same thing, man. When I was leaving Louisville, I'm a Southerner, 7th generation East Tennessean, and one leg shorter than the other one from running the ridges of East Tennessee, and. So when I was leaving Louisville, TC, they were going to send me to New York City to take over the recruiting for the Northeast. Yeah. And I'm like, and the Commandant had just put out a white letter, because this is like 2005. And it says, we must do everything as a Corps of Marines to exploit cultural understanding at every level. Of course, he was talking about Iraq and Afghanistan and the GWAT, but I flipped that around and sent it to my monitor and everybody I could email saying, look what the Commandant said, exploit cultural understanding. Sending this hillbilly from East Tennessee to New York City is a dumb idea. Why don't you send the New Yorker, this guy from New England, send him up there and send me to the low country? And thank God that's what they did. But I just don't get it.
Yeah. And when it comes to policing, your original point that there's a difference in how you police in these areas, people that grow up in these areas understand that at sort of a root directory level, that a Fed coming in from the other side of the country, you just won't. Sure, you can intellectually you can get there, but I would argue there's a sort of an emotional level. There's a connectivity that is critical. I mean, yeah. I go out and try to go up in one of those hollers out in East Tennessee and have a conversation with somebody. I'm going to be walking on eggshells the whole time so that I know I come home tonight. I don't end up in the bottom of some well somewhere. Mm. And understanding the familial dynamics, but I take somebody from the area, they're going to be at a much greater advantage moving into those areas. So the idea that you're going to create a federal police force, I think you lose a lot of efficacy. I think you really exacerbate the problems that they're complaining about now. Oh, the police are out of touch. The police don't understand their communities. It's simply not the case if they're local. It's less of a case if they're local officers recruited from the local community, raised in the local community, live in the local community, than it is from some Fed that might come in for 3 to 4 years and leave.
And I'll give you one more little vignette about this because I think it's rather humorous. One of my retirement gifts, because they knew I was retiring to this farm, my Marines bought me a brand new set of overalls. So I move up here to Cumberland, Plateau, and I got my brand new overalls on, and me and Miss Lisa go into town to get some breakfast. And this old timer walks up to me and he sticks his hands in his pockets and he's looking down at me at the table and he says, "What you running for?" Excuse me, sir? Like, yeah, what you running for? said, I'm not running, sir. I'm seated. And he's like, no, no, no. Anytime you fancy folks come down here with your brand new overalls on, you always want us to vote for something. What are you running for? And I'm like, oh, sir, I'm not running for anything. But I mean, it's that cultural understanding that just something as simple as a new pair of overalls, and I stick out like a sore thumb.
Sure.
But I also want to talk to something you mentioned a moment ago. When you were talking about, the place in Vermont that had funding for 100 and something, but they let the force slip down to some small number. And I think that's another reason why, like here in my town, they pay the police officers $25,000 a year. Let me say that again. It's 2021, 6.8% inflation, and the starting pay is $25,000. Now take out Uncle Sam's taxes, and you can't afford to live in a trailer behind your mama's house. So that's a problem. So what do these officers do to compensate? Boss, I'll take all the overtime you got. Somebody needs security at the carnival, I'll work it. And the next thing you know, these officers are working 100-hour weeks. And of course, they're burnt out because they've got open spots on the force. They're doing everything they can do. People are pushing them, spitting on them, calling them all these names. And then they overreact. And of course, there's 10 people there with a cell phone when they do overreact. So that was my point about, let's take it down to the micro level, that these policies have an effect, which creates this loop, I would surmise, of officers doing things that we don't want them to do. What are your thoughts?
Oh, sure. I mean, in an extreme example, when I first got in the Bureau, it was a big deal about the New Orleans Police Department. The Bureau put, 20 or 40 of them away.
Yep.
Skip Seitz, if he's still here, he probably remembers that. PJ might as well. Went in and just cleaned house on the NOPD because they were getting paid, comparable money to what you just talked about. And corruption took hold. And they were providing blue light taxis to criminals. I think in one case they were doing hits for drug dealers. I mean, it was really out of control. And it started with they just weren't getting paid an appropriate amount of money.
That's right.
And that's, I think, when you go back to defund the police, you're going to see that a lot. You're going to see that increase around the country. Is the number, like you saw, like I was talking about Burlington PD, the numbers drop, but you still have to have people on the streets. So you either have to refund the police, but of course now the city council members, they're vested in the idea that we're going to defund them, so they can't do that. So what do instead? They lower the standards. So you lower your hiring standards, you lower your background standards, you are letting people in that you wouldn't have let in before. And, maybe you drop the educational standards, maybe you drop the criminal background standards, and you start running the risk of hiring people that should never, ever get behind a badge. And who knows where that goes? That can go from minor cases of, relatively minor cases of people getting beat that shouldn't get beat, to, the worst extreme where you have massive systemic corruption, murder, just a police department that then has to be taken over by the feds just to clean it up.
Yeah.
I don't think that's what you want to do. It's talking about, I want to touch back on the feds real quick. You coming into town and how you're talking about your new overalls. One of the very first cases I worked after I got to Vermont, I had to go out to interview a guy in his dairy barn. And, Vermont was a sub office from Albany, New York. So our big boss, our SAC, was down in Albany. And at the time, the word was, unless you had a perfectly good, legitimate reason, you were wearing a suit and tie. Wherever you go, you're an FBI agent, you're going to look the part, you go, unless you get dispensation from on high. So I have to go out and interview this guy in a dairy barn. So I go strolling in there in my suit and tie and my overcoat, and my Bruno Mollies, and I'm in a freaking dairy barn in Vermont in mud season. They actually call it mud season when all the snow is melting. And you think that guy's going to talk to me?
Hell no.
He's going to laugh at me and that's what it was. The whole conversation, he just had a smirk on his face. He's looking at me like, seriously, dude, really? But again, that was a Fed coming in to do an interview at a local level. And you're going to see that if you have a federal police force. You're going to see mandates that have to be followed from Miami to Alaska, and it just doesn't necessarily always fit.
No, I remember Seeklander talking about this with the federal air marshals. In the early days of the federal air marshals, he said they might have air marshals on there with mohawks and flip-flops on and stuff like that. People you would never, ever assume was an air marshal, a highly trained, covert, officer.
But a generation ago, no way. Two
Oh no,
generations ago, it would have been suit and tie.
well, and then when the FBI and the Secret Service uh, uh, administrators came in and took over the air marshals, it was like, nope, you will be clean cut, hair neatly coiffed like Dr. Fuller's is this morning, and a suit and tie. And it's like, yeah, but if we're on a domestic flight, nobody's flying in that. They're flying in freaking pajamas. It's like, I'm going to stick out immediately. I'm already this buff,
Yeah,
uptight guy. Now you're going to put a bullseye on my forehead. It's stupid.
Yeah, when I first, my second boss in the bureau, he and I were on an elevator together. I had maybe a year on the job, and I was feeling froggy enough to grow my goatee. And he's looking at me. He's been in the office maybe a week now. And he looks at me and goes, "You like that goatee, TC?" I said, "Yes, sir, I do." It's like, "Well, I guess if you like looking like Satan, you can keep it."
Oh, wow.
I was like, I'm comfortable with that. But it was interesting because that mindset, right? Think about that mindset. One, he thought he had the power to tell me to shave it off, which by policy he didn't. But let's face it, in reality, he tells me to shave it, it's getting shaved. But that's, again, more. I know we've beat this horse near to death, but that was sort of that mindset. So I could see where, Seeklander had to fight that fight.
Yeah. And my lovely bride is on. She says, "Good morning, TC."
Good for her. Hi, Miss Lisa. Always a pleasure.
She wishes everyone a good morning, folks. Hope everyone had a wonderful Christmas. PJ says, "Dark suit, white shirt, red tie. It's the bureau uniform."
Just for you, PJ. Just for you. Actually, I have a client meeting here after this that I need to get to. So not right this second, but when we're done here, I wasn't sure if I'd have time to get gussied up by then.
Well, then I won't go much further on this. Let's switch gears, man, because I want to talk about something that's been in the news a lot lately, and that is the 23 Democrats leaving the House. 15 are retiring from public life completely. What does this tell you?
Yeah, you know what? I was checking those numbers this morning. It's up to 41 members
Are
of
you
the House.
kidding me?
Well, 35 members of the House, 6 members of the Senate are not seeking re-election. Now, the 6 senators are all going by the wayside. They're all leaving public life. They're retiring. Of the 35 members of the House, 20 of them are retiring completely, and 15 others are running for other various offices, public offices, either in their state or at the federal level. I think they see the writing on the wall. I mean, I really think that, traditionally midterm elections, the president's party loses seats in the House. So that there's no surprise there. But their majority is razor thin already. Kamala Harris has to cast deciding votes in the Senate because it's split equally. So that'll be interesting to see those 6 slots, those 6 seats opening up in the Senate. I don't think those 5 people would have left the Senate. The 5 Republicans would leave the Senate if they didn't think their seats were safe in the Republican side of the House. I just don't think they would have jumped. But those Democrats in the House are very interesting. I find them very, very interesting indeed, because they know they've got a razor thin margin. And, the way things are gerrymandered, generally they're all in relatively safe seats. I mean, some of them are up for grabs. But I think they just don't want to endure it. They don't want to run through this gauntlet, because it's going to be brutal this time around. I mean, I think what we're going to see the Republicans running on is a variation of "we told you so." You won an election, but you can't run the country. Look what you elected. And I think they've got a point. I mean, this president has been lackluster at best, and it shouldn't be a surprise because, again, he didn't run a campaign. We didn't get to see him in the campaigning arena because of propaganda. I like that. Cast back to the early part of the show. And he got in the door without really being properly vetted. Otherwise, people would have noticed just how much he's struggling, I think is the best way I can put that, to rise to the occasion. I mean, I think the man is not the same guy who was the vice president. I think it shouldn't be a surprise to us. I mean, age hits us all. And the idea that they're going to be painted with that presidential brush in this next election cycle in the House, I think some of these people realize, I just don't want to put myself through it. I just got to go. I got to get out of here.
Yeah. You mean this isn't the same old Scranton Joe, the scrappy guy who faced down that punk what was his name? Corn Pop.
Yeah. Yeah. Or they gave us that wondrous advice about just get a double barrel shotgun.
Yeah.
Go
Fire it
outside
off
and
into the
felony.
air. What's the problem? Oh boy.
Yeah. And that was when he was at his, the top of his game. So I think the writing is really on the wall for the House to flip. I think there's a good chance the Senate could flip as well. And that's going to make the last 2 years of the Biden presidency, I think, the best we as a nation can hope for, and that it'll largely be immobilized or at least neutralized from doing any real significant existential damage. I think some serious damage has been done, but I don't think it's irreparable. But there's a lot of people in this country that are sucking because of the policies of this administration, and
Oh my God.
these people in the Democrats in the House are gonna, rightfully take some of that blame. I mean, We're all paying $1 more a gallon at the pump. We're seeing, like you said, 6.8% inflation. That's the highest it's been in what? A generation. Right?
30-something years. I've got it here.
And that's in a year.
39 years. Yeah.
I mean, that's in a year. That is really tough to argue that it is anybody else's fault. It's really tough to put it back on the previous administration, which of course is the sort of the playbook go-to move. You blame the last guy. It's just his policies finally coming home to roost. I don't think you can do that this time around.
No, and I worry about the 25th Amendment. If that at some point is invoked, because let's face it, we got several more years with Mr. Biden, and I don't see his cognitive ability improving. Of course, it's just deteriorating as we watch every single day. So with that in mind, I mean, if the 25th was invoked, or if he decided to resign or something along those lines, I don't think that Kamala Harris, and I hope I pronounce her name correctly, because of course that's a sign of white supremacy. I didn't realize that, but Kamala Harris, I think I said it right. So if Vice President Harris were to take office, I don't see things improving under her administration. Do you?
No, I don't, because she's been promoted beyond her level of competence. She really has. I mean, and we saw that in the military, but an up or out system, you'd see people that, you either got up or you got out, and people would, you might have been one hell of a team leader, but as a platoon sergeant, you ain't getting it done. You might have been a great platoon leader, but as a battalion commander, you're failing miserably. I don't know that she was necessarily ever a great politician. Apparently she was a pretty good date for Mr. Brown back then.
Willie Brown, yeah.
And I think they've trotted her out on a couple of high profile, missions, and she's come up short. She really has been found lacking, to the point where they can't even conceal the fact that her staff is fleeing at an alarming level, and they didn't even do the whole year, right? I mean, people were bailing out in less than a year. That's kind of the proof of the pudding. That's where you want for the resume plug. If you're just there, I want to be able to tell the next job that I was on the vice president's staff. You got to do at least a year, because saying I was on the vice president's staff for 9 months, you got some splaining to do, right?
Yeah.
People raise their eyebrows about that. And in my mind, in my world, it would have to be pretty bad for me to suck it down for 9 months and go, man, I can't do these next 3. This is insanity. I got to go. Maybe I'm not a member of her staff material, but I think that as a result, even the Democratic Party is looking at her going, okay, we've got him, at least him we can control, and the media is helping us out. I think we can make that argument. And the propaganda machine is propping him up. But if we put her in there, we're going to have less control over what she says and does. And that might not necessarily be a good thing,
Yeah.
Because we can't really trust her to go on her own off script. This guy at least sticks to the script.
Yeah. But were you a congressional liaison or something like that?
I was. I spent a year up on Capitol Hill in the FBI director's office, working in the Office of Congressional Affairs.
Yeah. And Bob Bill says that's where propaganda comes in. It's the billionaires' fault. It's the evil big companies. It's racism. And again, that's a great circle back to what we started the show with this morning.
It is. It's brilliant. And I really liked Elon Musk lately. I mean, I wouldn't describe myself as a fan. I don't know enough about the man to really comment intelligently, but his interview with the Babylon Bee was pretty funny. And I just love it when I see Warren get up there and say he's freeloading. I'm like, freeloading. I mean, you can accuse him of a lot of things, I would imagine, that might actually be accurate. But the man employs how many people?
Oh my God.
He has created two, not one, but two massive corporations that are employing thousands of people. I would imagine there's some in her district. Maybe there's not. Maybe that's why she's upset.
Mhm.
And then he paid, what did he pay? $11 billion in taxes this year. I mean, that's astronomical. $11
yeah.
billion in taxes in 1 year.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I'd fire my tax attorney if I was him.
No kidding.
Somebody's losing their job over that.
Yeah. I want to talk about, unless you had anything else to talk about with regard to the Democrats fleeing right now, I wanted to switch gears because it's something that Americans seem to have forgotten, and that is that we still have Americans stranded in Afghanistan. Recently, the Wall Street Journal, I mean, like 5 days ago, said that their Wall Street Journal board called for Republicans to promise a serious inquiry into the White House's withdrawal disaster, their words, ahead of the 2022 midterm elections. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on it from having served in Afghanistan.
Well, it's shocking to me that issue vanished as fast as it did from the news cycle.
Yeah.
It was as though when the last aircraft went wheels up, the story stopped. And, so we're seeing the propaganda machine at work, right? They don't want to talk about the negative stuff. Well, that's a pretty big black eye for the Biden administration, the way that was handled. And I would put some of that on the military leadership as well. I mean,
oh yeah,
they've got to own that. Absolutely. General officers and the chief staff, they've got to own that.
Why has Milley not been fired? I mean, seriously.
Right. Well, I would think for self-preservation reasons alone, Biden could have turned that around and said, fire him and blame it all on him, right? First rule of political assassination is kill the assassin. Mm-hmm. He screwed up. We got to have a scapegoat. We'll put it on him, and then I can put my hands up and say, I didn't know. Jesus, trust in the professionals, and you can script that out yourself.
Yeah.
But it's a national shame that we're paying zero attention to the plight of the people still stuck there. Now, I would very much like to hear the stories of why they're stuck there, why they didn't get out when they saw it coming down the pike, why they're still there now. These are all stories I'd like to hear, but the media has moved on because, again, it's less about reporting the story and more about clickbait and, what do people want to hear about? And, Beyonce might have worn a new dress, and we all need to hear about that instead of, Americans dying in Afghanistan, because that's depressing. It's a bummer,
Yeah,
who wants to hear about that? It's interesting though that the Wall Street Journal wants the Republicans to call for that instead of saying to the sitting administration, "Hey, this was on you. This egg's on your face. You need to clean this up." But then instead they're saying, "Oh, hey, Republicans, when the adults leave, the adults who are apparently back in office now, when they're gone, could you please pick up this baton?" To me, that says they recognize that one party is a little bit more responsible than the other.
Yeah, it's like we have this January 6th committee that's really going full steam, and it's like there is nobody dissecting the debacle in Afghanistan and the loss of American lives and American treasure, American equipment. It's mind blowing that this is just allowed to happen like that.
But you can pin January 6th. You can pin it on a guy who might run for president again and who might win. So you need to keep that alive. I mean, remember how long the Benghazi investigation went on?
Oh yeah.
With Trey Gowdy, Congressman Trey Gowdy up there screaming and yelling. Well, the idea was keep that alive because we're going to hang this millstone around Hillary Clinton's neck when she
rightly so,
and rightly so. But he kept that thing going for what, a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to have to do some work with the Benghazi committee. I've watched those Predator feeds a million times, and the videos from that night. It's a political tactic, right? It goes back to what we were talking about at the top of the show, the propaganda. We want to talk about the things we want to talk about, elicit the emotional responses we want to elicit, but we don't want to talk about the things we don't want to talk about. Mm-hmm. And the negative stuff we're not going to talk about. So then you see media on each side of the fence choosing what they're going to report on. The right-wing guys are going to report on the stuff that makes the left-wing guy look bad, and the left-wing guy reports on what makes the right-wing guy look bad. But neither one of them are sitting down asking the question, what is the important news of the day? what do we need to talk about? What do we need to discuss so that our viewership is informed? That's not the conversation that's being had, at least not in any substantive manner I can discern.
Yeah. And again, to your point about the Hillary Clinton Benghazi committees, eventually she gave them the soundbite that they wanted. What does it matter if Americans got killed or whatever her exact soundbite was? But it was just like, ooh.
And then that feeds into, and again, I make no judgment as to which side of the political fence somebody might be on, but it feeds into a propaganda machine, right? They can take that soundbite.
Oh yeah.
And they can just beat you to death with it. And that's a tried and true element of propaganda is, simple, familiar language, sound bites, the idea, think about this one, common sense gun control. How many times have you heard that?
Yeah.
Right. That's one of those little sound bites. Thinking this way is the only intelligent or compassionate choice, a real American choice. That is anti-American, or the phrase from Congress you get a lot. The American people want to know. How do you know?
Mm-hmm.
But these are these sound bites and these phrases that our society is conditioned to respond to, that will elicit an emotional response and that are quick to insert. You can throw those little things out anywhere you want to. What does it matter? So if I'm being interviewed by CNN tomorrow and they're beating me up and I say, well, what does it matter? It's going to be an automatic throwback to her.
Yes.
In a negative connotation, an emotional negative connotation. And again, I make no judgment as to why they're doing that. I'm just saying it is an element of propaganda that works.
Oh, it definitely works. Yeah, it definitely works. Dan says, I recorded world news on 2 major networks and watched a third. They were all reporting the same story with the same location. Coincidence? Well, and then another thing with that is, I believe today you have to triangulate the news. I will literally watch Al Jazeera, I will watch Reuters, I'll watch the BBC, then I'll watch Fox and CNN just to kind of round out how they're discussing a story. And I think we have to do that.
Discern the kernel of commonality.
Yes, exactly.
And it's amazing. How many times did you work cases, Rich, back in the day where it ended up in the news and you had an intimate knowledge of that case or anything when you were working in the Red Cross, where you had an intimate knowledge of the decisions that went into it and the results and everything. And you read the report and go, my God, this is so far from true. It's painful.
Absolutely.
Right. And so you just go, why? This isn't ridiculous. You turn the page and you go, oh, they've got a really insightful article about the PLO. Well, what the hell makes you think they're any more smart about the PLO than they were about the case you knew about? But we continue to believe them.
Yeah.
And I'm the same way. I'm like, oh, wow, that's a really interesting article. I got to read this.
I'd have the same thing with prosecutors. I've handed them an investigation that in some cases was 7 inches thick and, give them an executive summary, would have all the details and facts in it. Cause I don't want this thing screwed up, right? I've spent a lot of my life on this and I'm going to have to go to court and testify a bunch on it. And then they would come out and in open court misstate the facts. And I'm like, guys, how are you bunkling this? Because now I'm going to have to go on record like, no, sir, that's not correct at all. And embarrass the whole prosecution, which I did not want to do. I wanted to see this scumbag go to jail.
Sure. Or better, you send them that, you send the executive summary, and then 10 minutes later, they're calling you and asking you a question that you're like, well, that was paragraph 2 of the executive summary I just gave you.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, well, I just need to know this real quick. Really? Or how many times did you send up tables and charts when you were a recruiter to higher levels of command and then had to field questions and emails about the information that you're like, I spent 3 days and 5 of my staff members worked on this to get that to you and you couldn't read it?
Exactly. Which is why I always like to present it. If I'm given an opportunity to step in and present this, go through the PowerPoint and present COAs, like you want COA A, you don't want course of action B.
But it's that mindset that ends up with a Speaker of the House of Representatives saying something like, well, we've got to pass this legislation so that we know what's in it.
That's right. What are you talking about?
I'm not sure that's the way it's supposed to work.
No. Ken is on, says, good morning. Coin number 1771. If you want to know what a coin number is, click the link in the top of today's show notes. And Dan says, that's what happened in Kenosha.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, I want to be respectful of your time, TC. I've had you on here well over an hour, man. As you alluded to earlier, We've got the U.S. reporting inflation currently at 6.8%, which is a 39-year high. And I want to ask you the question I'm going to come out with is this a strategic threat to the sovereignty of the United States? And before you answer that, I want to give the viewers some context. They changed the goalpost on what is and is not how they calculate the metric for inflation. For example, if we use 1990s metric for inflation, our current inflation wouldn't be 6.8, it would be 9.8. If we use the metric that they used in the 80s, the current inflation would not be 6.8, it would be 14.5%. So they're playing fast and loose with the numbers in order to get a slightly better inflation rate. But if we were using what you and I grew up with, TC, it would be at 14.5%. Is this a problem, and where are we heading?
Well, I think you've had other guests on the show that could comment far more intelligently on that particular question than I can. But I will say this about that. If you're not meeting the standard, change the standard, right?
Yeah.
Hey, 14.5 is a number we can't live with. We better fudge this around a little bit. And we go back to the old quote, they're liars, damn liars, and statisticians.
Yeah.
You can monkey with these numbers. And I think that most Americans, it has the effect that they want, right? We just throw up our hands and go, it's out of my control. The numbers are too big. This is crazy. Is it a strategic threat to the United States? We've survived high inflation rates before, but we haven't had this in a generation, right? I mean, you and I remember a time when, a home loan was 18, 19, 20%.
Oh yeah.
And listen to people complain about that. Is that coming down the pike? Sure. Does this end up getting us to start a war or get involved in a real serious knockdown drag out with somebody? I don't know. I would suggest it might not be the best time for Russia to invade the Ukraine. I mean, yeah, our presidential leadership is in turmoil. But the one thing that has traditionally been a unifying factor in the United States is a war. You want to get everybody looking in the same direction, fight a war. Right. After 9/11, we were all looking the same direction. I mean, Bill Clinton gets caught off base with Monica Lewinsky. He starts launching cruise missiles like it's cool.
Yeah. Operation Desert Fox. That's right. That's right. Reagan did the same thing. The Marine barracks gets blown up. We invade Grenada.
But you stop talking about other issues, domestic issues, and you start kind of all heading in that one direction. That wars are great for instilling nationalistic fever, but it also does wonders for your economy. Problem is, of course, you got to do a lot of deficit spending during a war, and I don't know that we're in the strongest position to be able to do that right now.
Yeah.
And who do we borrow money from if we invade China or we attack China? I mean, who's going to loan us the cash to fight that fight?
Yeah, good luck.
So I think it puts us, I don't know that it's necessarily a existential threat to the country. I think it weakens our position. I think in the levels that we're operating at, that weakness is bad, right? Like, let's face it. I go out and issue a competition tomorrow, handgun competition, and I don't have the best breakfast. Is it going to really impact where I come out on the standings? Probably not. Mike Seeklander goes out tomorrow to shoot a pistol competition, and it matters, right? Yeah. Because at the level he's competing at, a missed step here, a fumbled draw there, and he's done. Well, yeah. I would suggest that at the geopolitical level, the United States is in much that same position. Little things matter a whole lot more at the levels we operate at. The economy of Burundi gets a 25% inflation rate. It's really not going to have a global impact, right?
Right.
Bhutan has a sudden influx of cash. It's not going to matter a lot. The United States economy fumbles and things start getting weird all over the country, not the country, all over the planet.
Yeah.
There are entire countries whose largest income is U.S. foreign aid. There are countries that are only sovereign nations because of the umbrella of defense that the United States provides.
Yes.
So for us to weaken and financially be forced to withdraw from areas has an impact. I mean, look at what happened when Russia's economy went in the tank, when the USSR's economy went in the tank. How many nations suddenly were able to escape from behind the Iron Curtain, right? It crumbled because they couldn't afford. And that was sort of a net good from our perspective. Well, there's no reason to think that if the United States economy fumbles, that we won't experience similar upheavals around the country, but not necessarily as a net good, if that makes sense.
Yes, it totally makes sense. And my brother Jeff is on. Good morning, Jeff. He says, did you see the comments from China about Lithuania? I did not.
Mm-mm.
So if you could put a link up there, I'd greatly appreciate that. I want to talk about something you said. We've seen high inflation before, and I talked about this in the economic collapse show I did, and that is, a lot of people say we've never seen true hyperinflation in the United States. Never seen it. I would say, well, that's not true. It depends on where you live, because in the Confederacy they did experience hyperinflation. Yeah, it was to the tune of more than 7,000%, because it was the first time that fiat currency was experimented with. And the Confederacy tried to print their way through the war because they didn't have the material and natural resources, of course, that the North had. So, yes, I think inflation can be bad, not just for the United States, but bad for everybody. Okay, Jeff has given us a thing here. This is threatens Lithuania with garbage bin of history for Taiwan. Wow. Yikes. And, the rise of China, there for a long time, China was not little country, but this country that was just happy manufacturing things for everybody. And then all of a sudden it started quietly developing its defense technology to the tune where, wow, look what they've got now. Wonder what they'll do with it. Didn't Japan do the same thing? Built a massive navy and hired the British government to teach it how to sail the seven seas. And next thing you know, it beats the crap out of Russia. And right before World War I. And
everybody gets all shocked that, oh my God, a non-white nation has defeated a white nation. Heavens, this is not supposed to happen.
And it was a prelude to what was to come for World War II. So I don't think we can view these things in isolation. It also speaks to what Dan said earlier in the comments section. He said, if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it.
That's very true. Which is the beautiful thing about this show.
What was you saying?
I said it's a beautiful thing about this show.
What's that?
We remind people of their history.
We try. What keeps you up nights, TC?
The fact that I've got a daughter that's about to turn 30. That keeps me up.
Too.
Now, the fragmentation of our society really, really worries. I see it increasing and increasing and increasing. And I thought, a year and a half ago that it would, that we would reach a certain point and it would stop. But now I'm like, what is the end game? What is the end state going to be? And where are we going to hit that tipping point? You've heard me say before that, when people get hungry, when their kids start getting hungry, the potential for violence starts going up. And we're seeing, I see more and more empty shelves in my local grocery store. Well, if I'm seeing it, other people are seeing it. That is concerning because I've never seen that in my lifetime, right? Not in this country. I've been in plenty of places where that is the case, but I've never seen it here in the United States. So these shortages combined with our political fracturing, combined with more and more extremist positions being propagated, and undue attention being paid to social media, further balkanizing the nation. As soon as we stop thinking of ourselves as one tribe of Americans and we start thinking of ourselves as a collection of individual tribes, it makes it a lot easier to establish that us versus them mentality. And there are people that will take advantage of that. They will absolutely take advantage of that. And I'm not just talking about domestically, but internationally. I mean, other nation state actors would love nothing more than to see this country fragment. So I get concerned about that. That worries me, this increasing fragmentation I see throughout the country.
If you were to take what you see and project it all the way out to 2024, care to take a guess where we're going to be?
I think we're going to see increasingly extreme presidential candidates. I think we're going to see further right than Mr. Trump. I think we're going to see further left than Elizabeth Warren continue to pursue the presidency. I think we're going to see thinner margins for presidential elections. I think we're going to see, 49-51 splits. I think we're going to see creation of cabals to get a guy elected. marriages of convenience to get people into those offices. I think that politicians and the media have both realized that there's money to be made from conflict, from dividing people up. I mean, you've heard me say it before, the Democrats were largely a dying political party, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And now they're viable again, right? Because they're winning presidential elections. They're winning elections around the country. They're appealing to further and further extremist positions, but they're also inciting disarray. They're inciting and fanning the flames of disagreement and those tribal separations pretty much ever since Mr. Obama took office, that allow them to target the message to their constituencies, the people they want to vote for them. And I think that creates more and more strife. And I don't think there's any money to be made in calming that strife down for a cynical media and for cynical politicians. So I don't think we'll see it go away. Oh, and I think we're going to see another variant of COVID, because that's kind of cool.
You mean, are we done with Omicron already? Are we good?
Well, since, it's a sniffle and a sneeze for most people, I think, and I don't mean to make light of it. I recognize that it has killed people. I've lost friends to it. But I think we're going to see that go on and on and on. That's awesome. That's the wife calling.
Wow. It's funny. You're right. I mean, the idea of us laughing about the Omicron or anything, I don't want to be insensitive. I'm going to a funeral literally tomorrow night for a good friend that passed away on Christmas Eve from COVID. And this guy was an absolute warrior. So it is real, and we need to be as sensitive to it as we possibly can. But at the same time, we got to get on with our lives. We've got an economy to run. We've got families to run. It is going to be tragic. At the same time, what are we supposed to do? Shut down all air travel and live inside our homes forever?
I mean, there are countries where malaria, HIV, yellow fever kill droves of people. They continue to live their lives. We've got to simply accept the fact that this is not going away. It's going to be part of our reality. And as you say, we've got to adapt and overcome.
Yeah. TC, I've kept you on here for almost an hour and a half, brother. Any final thoughts?
No, I really appreciate it, Rich. I continue to be flattered that you have me back. I see that the quality and quantity of your guests continue to rise, and I kind of maintain the same, and I'm still getting invited back, and I really appreciate that. I really enjoy interacting with your audience members, and I really thank you very much for having me on, because I know the fight is coming. I just want to be ready.
There you go.